Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. You know that feeling when you walk out into your garden, or you go to check on your absolute favorite houseplant, only to find it drooping, yellowing, or just looking downright miserable? It's incredibly frustrating. Your heart kind of sinks, and your very first thought is almost always, what is attacking my plant? Well, today, we're going to become diagnostic detectives. We're going to dive into the science of plant pathology, but we're going to completely flip the script on what you probably think is happening. We are investigating the root causes of plant decline by looking at a major category of suspects, the most common, yet literally the most overlooked culprits in the garden, the abiotic suspects.
So let's kick things off with a slightly uncomfortable question. Is a bug killing your plant, or are you? I know, it's human nature to immediately assume that every sick plant is the victim of some highly contagious disease or a ravenous pest. We all want a villain to spray, right? But the really fascinating truth here, and this comes straight from agricultural extension research, is that insects and pathogens rarely attack completely healthy plant tissue. Usually the plant has already been severely stressed by an unseen, non-living factor. The bugs and the fungi, honestly, they're just the opportunists moving in after the plant's defenses are already down.
Chapter 1. The Plant's Detective.
To figure out what's really going on, we literally have to treat the garden or even just your living room windowsill exactly like a crime scene. We need a systematic, logical approach to diagnosing plant problems, instead of just guessing and throwing chemicals at the issue. While the top agricultural experts use a pretty intense 10-step fact-gathering method, we can actually distill all of that into a highly actionable 4-step diagnostic protocol for us to use. Step 1, identify the plant. I mean, you can't know what's wrong if you don't even know who the victim is, right? Step 2, define what is normal. Some plants just naturally drop half their needles in the fall, or they have spotty, variegated leaves. Step 3, review cultural practices. Did you just transplant it? Did it drop below freezing last night? And finally, step 4, look for patterns in the landscape. Are all the plants affected or just one single plant? This structured approach right here is going to be our best tool.
Just take a look at this bizarrely distorted pineapple. Without a structured investigation, you'd probably think some crazy alien virus took hold here. But plant distortion, which is technically known as fasciation, can be caused by almost anything. We're talking an insect, a rogue herbicide drifting on the wind, or even just a simple genetic misfire. Without following our 4-step protocol, we're really just taking shots in the dark.
Chapter 2. Biotic versus abiotic suspects. And this brings us to the absolute core of our investigation, dividing our suspects into 2 distinct categories. In plant pathology, there's this concept called the disease circle, and it's split right down the middle between living and non-living stressors. We absolutely have to learn how to differentiate between the biotic, so the living pathogens like fungi, bacteria, and insects, and the abiotic, the non-living environmental and cultural factors. So how do we tell them apart? Well, it's all about spatial and temporal clues. Biotic problems, the living ones, spread randomly as the organism moves around. They're usually highly species-specific, and the damage gets progressively worse over days or weeks. But abiotic problems act entirely differently. They usually cause uniform damage across a wide area, the onset of the damage is super sudden, and they do not care what kind of plant it is. A sudden frost or a chemical spill is going to damage the tomatoes just as badly as the lettuce planted right next to it.
This is exactly why looking at those broader patterns is so crucial. On the left, we've got a biotic rust scale on a juniper, which is caused by a fungus. On the right, we've got an abiotic gall on a honey locust tree, which was actually caused by a chemical herbicide. They look incredibly similar, don't they? Symptoms can be deeply deceiving. If you just looked at the lump on the right and sprayed a fungicide all over that tree, you'd be totally wasting your time and money because the cause was a chemical spray, not a living fungus.
Chapter 3. Environmental and Weather Stress.
Let's move into our first major category of abiotic suspects, environmental and weather stress. When plants look sick, the weather is very, very often the actual villain of the story. Extreme heat, a sudden freeze, high winds, and drought can completely mimic infectious diseases. A classic example of this is physiological leaf roll. Have you ever seen your tomato plants curl their leaves all the way up like little canoes in the middle of July? It looks terrifying, like a virus is totally ravaging the plant. But actually, scratch that. It's just a defensive response. The plant is literally trying to reduce its surface area exposed to the hot sun to limit water loss. It's basically the plant putting on a sun hat and squinting in the bright light. It is purely an abiotic response, and usually you don't need any treatment other than giving it a little shade or making sure you're watering it consistently.
Chapter 4. Water and Soil Issues.
All right, as we delve underground, the root-soil interface is where things get super tricky.
It's arguably the most frequent source of physiological distress in all of horticulture, simply because what happens down in the dirt dictates absolutely everything we see above ground. Just look at how perfectly these symptoms overlap between underwatering and overwatering. Both of them cause wilting, both cause lower leaves to turn yellow, and both cause leaf drop. Why? Because both situations result in a dangerous loss of turgor pressure, which is just the internal water pressure inside the plant cells. When you underwater it, well, there's no moisture to pump up. But when you overwater it, you drown the roots, they rot, and suddenly they can't pump moisture up either. The plant acts thirsty because, functionally speaking, it is.
Another massive abiotic culprit in this category is soil compaction. Look, roots need oxygen just as much as they need water. If the soil is heavy, dense clay, or maybe it's just been walked over a million times, the roots literally suffocate. They physically cannot expand. Here's a highly practical tip straight from our sources. Use the screwdriver test. Just take a standard screwdriver and try to push it into the soil near your plant. If you can't easily push it down about 6 inches, your soil is compacted. That yellowing, stunted plant isn't diseased at all, it's suffocating.
And sometimes, the subterranean problem is purely mechanical. Check out this beech tree. Do you see those roots wrapping all the way around the base? Those are called girdling roots. Because of how the tree was planted, usually it's put in too deep or left in a plastic nursery pot way too long. The roots grow in a circle and literally strangle the main trunk as it grows. The canopy of this tree will slowly die back, mimicking a severe disease, but the cause is 100% non-living, mechanical, and abiotic.
Chapter 5. Nutrient and pH imbalances. Next up on our list of abiotic suspects is silent starvation, nutrient and pH imbalances. You have to think of plants as little chemical factories. When they lack the proper raw materials, the machinery just breaks down. Plants need a highly specific combination of elements to thrive. We divide these into macronutrients, which are the major building blocks needed in large amounts like nitrogen and calcium, and micronutrients, which are needed in tiny, tiny trace amounts like iron and zinc. Too much or too little of any of these elements can cause massive physiological failures that look exactly like a viral infection.
So when a plant is starving, it tells us through a symptom called chlorosis. Now, that isn't just fancy scientific jargon. Chlorosis is quite literally the visual language the plant uses to communicate distress to us. It's a yellowing or whitening of the tissue, which often leaves the veins looking starkly dark green. And depending on where this chlorosis shows up on the plant, you can actually decode exactly which nutrient is missing.
For instance, let's talk about immobile nutrients like calcium and iron. Once a plant builds its tissue with these, it cannot move them around later. So if the plant suddenly runs out of iron, the old leaves will stay green, but the newest, youngest leaves up at the very top will turn bright yellow. And here's the craziest part of all of this. Often, the iron is actually sitting right there in the soil. But if the soil's pH is too alkaline, meaning it's above 7.0, it chemically locks the iron away so the plant's roots physically can't absorb it. In that case, you don't need to dump more fertilizer on it, you need to fix the soil's pH.
Chapter 6. Human error.
Well, we've reached the twist ending of our diagnostic investigation. We've looked at the weather, the water, the soil, and the nutrients. But often, the absolute most common abiotic culprit is the gardener themselves. We call this the too much love syndrome, though sometimes it's really just pure accident. We cause immense abiotic stress to our own plants. We plant our trees entirely too deeply, completely burying their root flares. We accidentally smash into their trunks with weed eaters, ripping open wounds. We spray herbicides on the lawn that end up drifting over and deforming our vegetable gardens. We overwater them in a total panic, and we misuse pesticides, chemically burning the very leaves we were desperately trying to save. It really all comes back to this fundamental horticultural philosophy. Selecting the right plant for the right place goes a long way in ensuring a plant stays healthy. If you take a shade-loving plant and stick it out in the full sun, it is going to suffer major abiotic heat stress. And then, because it is so stressed out, the bugs and the fungi are going to sense that weakness and move right in. Proper cultural care is what prevents those secondary, living pests from ever becoming a problem in the first place.
So the absolutely crucial point here, the golden rule of plant diagnostics is this. Always rule out the abiotic suspects before you even think about reaching for a pesticide or fungicide spray. Investigate the environment. Check the watering history. Go out and do the screwdriver test on the soil. Look at the pH. Look for human error. Because if you just spray a chemical without fixing the underlying abiotic stress, you are more than likely just making the problem worse. The best tool you have in your gardening toolkit isn't found in a spray bottle. It's your own power of observation. So, the next time you find a drooping, yellowing plant in your yard, will you panic and react immediately? Or will you take a step back, observe the environment, and investigate the scene like a true plant detective? Remember, observe first, act second. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and happy sleuthing out there in the garden.